The photographer asked me to step out of my own bedroom so he could finish the listing photos. I stood in the doorway and looked at the wide-angle lens, pointed toward the bed I had shared with my husband for 36 years. The framed photograph of Thomas had been removed from the dresser. My blue wool blanket had been folded away. A bowl of artificial lemons sat where his watch used to rest. "Who hired you?" I asked. The photographer lowered his camera. "Your children said the seller would be away until 6. I am the seller." He stared at me, then glanced toward the stairs. Outside, a red and white for sale sign had already been planted in the narrow front garden of my semi-detached house in the Junction. A lockbox hung from the porch railing. I had left that morning to volunteer with bookkeeping records at the library. When I returned, strangers were photographing the life my children had decided I no longer needed. My neighbor Marco stood at the gate holding his phone. "Katerina, the listing went live an hour ago," he said. He showed me the screen. My address appeared beneath polished photographs of the living room, kitchen, and upstairs bedrooms. The asking price was low enough to attract a fast sale. The description called the house vacant possession after closing. I was neither vacant nor leaving. My daughter Laura called before I could reach her. "Mom, please do not make a scene. Evan and I were going to explain tonight." "Explain why my home is for sale?" "You said you would consider downsizing. Considering is not signing." She told me the market was moving quickly and that they had only started the process so I would not miss an opportunity. Behind me, the photographer quietly packed his equipment. On the kitchen counter, I found a staging checklist. Family photographs removed. Personal papers concealed. Owner moving to condo before closing. Every line had been completed, except one. Seller approval confirmed. Marco opened the digital listing agreement on his phone and enlarged the final page. My name appeared beneath an electronic signature, Katerina Hale. I had never met the realtor. I had never approved a price. I had never given either of my children authority to sell the house. Then I saw the email address printed on the signature certificate. It used my name, but it was not mine. The recovery number ended in 4 digits I recognized. They belonged to Laura's phone. I kept looking at the final 4 digits of Laura's phone number until the photographer left and Marco closed the front gate behind him. The house was quiet again, but it no longer felt private. Every room had been measured, brightened, and prepared for someone else. In the dining room, the table where I had balanced hotel payroll records for 28 years had been cleared, except for a ceramic bowl Laura had brought for staging. I removed it and opened the lower cabinet. The blue ledger was still there. I had carried that ledger from apartment to apartment after arriving in Toronto from Split in 1986. I was 28, newly married to Thomas, and working mornings in a hotel laundry before moving into payroll. Numbers were easier than accents. A payment either arrived or it did not. A total either matched or it did not. Thomas worked as a streetcar mechanic for the Toronto Transit Commission. We saved for 8 years before buying the red brick semi-detached house in 1994. Every mortgage payment passed through my hands. I recorded the date, amount, interest, and remaining balance in the blue ledger. On the day we signed the mortgage, Thomas gave me a black fountain pen and said, "Never sign a page you have not read twice." I still use that pen for property tax forms and legal documents. Thomas died 4 years ago, at 72. Afterward, the title was updated into my name alone. I had never given Evan or Laura power of attorney over the house. They had keys for emergencies, not authority. I opened the desk drawer and found the fountain pen wrapped in a linen cloth. Beside it were copies of my recent tax documents. My signature leaned slightly forward and ended with a narrow line beneath the final letter. The electronic signature on the listing agreement was rounded, careless, and placed in the center of the box. It carried my name, but none of my habits. I turned back to the staging checklist. Laura had written notes in the margin. Remove family photographs. Store personal files. Neutralize primary bedroom. Near the bottom, one sentence had been underlined twice. Owner moving to condo before closing. I had never visited a condo. I had never chosen a moving date, yet someone had already written a future for me in blue ink. Then I noticed a second sheet beneath the checklist. It was a schedule for professional cleaning, open house preparation, and key transfer. The open house was set for Saturday morning, less than 48 hours away. Evan and Laura arrived that evening carrying the future they had chosen for me. Evan placed a spreadsheet on the dining table. Laura set down a glossy brochure for a one-bedroom condominium in Etobicoke. "You cannot stay in this house forever," Evan said. "The stairs are steep. The roof will need work." Toronto winters are getting harder. I looked at the columns on his spreadsheet. Estimated sale price, realtor fees, condo purchase, family distribution. They had divided the remaining money before I had agreed to leave. Laura opened the brochure and pointed to a bright kitchen with white cabinets. "There is an elevator. No snow to shovel. You would be close to shops and transit. Did you choose the unit?" I asked. She smiled as if that proved how thoughtful she had been. "We reserved a viewing." "Under whose name?" Neither answered immediately. Evan pulled out a chair. "Mom, this is not an attack. The market is strong now. If we wait, you could lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could also lose my house," he sighed. "The house will come to us eventually. We are only moving the process forward." The word eventually rested between us like a claim. Laura said I had talked about downsizing after Thomas died. I reminded her that speaking about loneliness was not permission to sell the place where I lived. She said older parents often resisted necessary change because familiar things felt safer. "I am not resisting change," I said. "I am resisting decisions made without me." Evan tapped the listing price. It was below what similar houses on our street had sold for. He called it a strategy to create multiple offers. I asked whether the realtor knew I had never approved that strategy. Laura looked at her phone. "You are focusing on paperwork instead of the bigger picture. Paperwork is the bigger picture when my name is on it." I placed the printed listing agreement beside my black fountain pen. "Who created the email account?" Laura said nothing. Evan looked at her. Then he told me the account was only a practical solution, because I was not comfortable with electronic forms. I had managed electronic payroll for a hotel with more than 300 employees before retiring. Laura knew that. She lowered her voice and said, "They were trying to protect me from making a rush decision later." "You already made the rush decision," I said. "You simply removed me from it." I turned Evan's spreadsheet toward myself. Beneath family distribution, 2 amounts had been highlighted. His portion was marked business stabilization. Laura's was marked mortgage relief. I looked up at both of them. "So tell me," I said, "which one of you signed my name?" Laura's eyes moved toward the phone still resting in her hand. Laura did not answer my question. She gathered the condo brochure and told Evan they should leave before the conversation became hurtful. I watched them walk out of the house they had already divided on paper. The next morning, I carried the listing agreement, Evan's spreadsheet, the staging checklist, my blue ledger, and Thomas's fountain pen to the office of Michelle Baptiste, a real estate litigation lawyer in downtown Toronto. Michelle was 49, precise and patient enough to let silence expose what people preferred not to say. She examined the title first. My name was the only one registered on the property. After Thomas died, the house had passed fully into my ownership. There was no power of attorney giving Evan or Laura authority to sell, mortgage, or manage it. Then how did the listing become active? I asked. That is what the electronic record should tell us, she said. Michelle contacted the brokerage and demanded that every record connected to the listing be preserved. She asked for the original agreement, identity verification notes, email history, telephone numbers, timestamps, device information, and the full electronic signature certificate. While we waited, I built a timeline the way I once prepared a payroll investigation. Laura booked the photographer on Tuesday. Evan arranged the condo viewing on Wednesday morning. The listing agreement was sent Wednesday afternoon. The for sale sign appeared Thursday before I had been told anything. Their plan had not begun with my consent. It had begun with my absence. Serena Cole, the listing realtor, called Michelle before noon. She admitted she had never met me in person. Laura had introduced herself as the daughter coordinating her widowed mother's downsizing. Serena said she believed approval had been completed electronically. Did she verify my identification directly? I asked. Michelle repeated the question. Serena paused, then said no. The brokerage sent the audit certificate an hour later. The email account used my full name, but it had been created only 9 days earlier. The recovery telephone number ended in Laura's 4 digits. The agreement had been opened and signed from a device connected to her account. At the exact time the signature was recorded, I had been logged into the library volunteer system several kilometers away. Michelle placed the audit pages beside my real signature in the blue ledger. "Your children did not simply speak for you," she said. "Someone created a paper version of you and gave that version permission to sell your home." I invited Evan and Laura to the house at 9 the next morning and placed the condo brochure, the staging checklist, and Evan's spreadsheet on the dining table. I did not show them the audit certificate. Michelle had told me that evidence was most useful before the person responsible knew how much had been preserved. By noon, I said, "The listing will be canceled, the open house will be stopped, the lockbox will be removed, and every copy of my property documents will be returned." Laura folded her arms. "You are making this sound criminal when we were trying to help. Then helping should be easy to stop." I asked her to close the email account created in my name and provide a written explanation of who opened it, who used it, and who approved the electronic signature. I asked Evan to contact the condominium agent and confirm that no appointment, reservation, or application had been made under my name. He looked at the spreadsheet instead of me. "If we pull the listing now, we lose momentum," he said. "The showroom is carrying supplier debt. I built the repayment plan around the sale." It was the first time he said the truth without covering it in concern for my stares. Laura turned toward him, but he continued. He said the house was fully paid, the Toronto market was strong, and I would still have enough money for the condominium and retirement. "Enough? According to whom?" I asked. Laura said her mortgage payments had fallen behind after 2 staging contracts were canceled. She had expected her portion of the sale to help her recover. "You both spent my house before I agreed to sell it." Evan called it an advance on an inheritance they would eventually receive. I placed my hand on the blue ledger. "An inheritance begins after a life ends. Mine has not," Laura said. Canceling now would damage her professional relationship with Serena and embarrass everyone at the brokerage. I told her embarrassment was not a greater loss than consent. "You planned relief for yourselves and called it safety for me." At 11:40, neither of them had made a call. Evan proposed that we meet Serena before the open house and review the situation calmly. Laura said the realtor could explain why the sale was still the sensible choice. I agreed, but only on one condition. The brokerage compliance manager would attend, and Michelle would sit beside me. Laura's expression changed. Evan asked why a lawyer was necessary if this was only a family disagreement. I closed the ledger and picked up Thomas's fountain pen. "Because my name was used outside this family," I said. "Now the truth will be heard outside it too." The brokerage conference room was colder than the street outside. Serena Cole sat at one end of the table with the listing agreement open on her laptop. Beside her was the compliance manager, a gray-haired man named Daniel Cho, who introduced himself and asked that everyone speak one at a time. Michelle sat to my right. I placed Thomas's fountain pen on the table and kept my hands folded beside it. Evan arrived with his spreadsheet. Laura carried the condominium brochure as though the meeting were still about choosing the best place for me to live. "We all want the same thing," she began. "A safe transition for Mom." "Then start with the owner," Michelle said. Serena looked at me. "Mrs. Hale, did you authorize this listing?" "No." "Did you approve the asking price?" "No." "Did you sign the agreement electronically?" "No." Evan leaned forward. She agreed in principle. We were helping with the technical steps. I turned toward him. "When did I agree?" He mentioned a Sunday lunch 3 months earlier, when I had said the stairs felt tiring after carrying laundry. Laura added that I had once admired a friend's condominium. "Admiring a kitchen is not permission to sell a house," I said. Serena scrolled through the agreement. My electronic signature appeared at the bottom of each page. Daniel asked whether Serena had met me before the listing went live. She admitted she had not. He asked whether she had viewed my identification directly. Again, she said no. Laura interrupted and said she had provided everything because I found online forms stressful. I looked at her. "I managed electronic payroll for more than 300 employees. You know that." Her face tightened. Evan said the paperwork was secondary because the financial decision remained sensible. He opened his spreadsheet and pointed to the sale estimate, the condominium cost, and the remaining balance. "Mom would still be secure," he said. Michelle did not look at the numbers. "Security is not the issue before us. Authority is. Daniel asked Serena to display the electronic signature audit certificate on the wall monitor. The room darkened as the screen appeared. My full name was at the top. Beneath it were the email account, recovery, telephone number, device record, and timestamp. Michelle asked Serena to read the recovery number aloud. Laura stopped moving. The final 4 digits matched the telephone lying beside her hand. Daniel looked from the screen to Laura. Michelle asked one question. Whose number is that? No one answered. I picked up Thomas's fountain pen and placed it beside the electronic signature projected on the wall. The pen had signed every payment that built my home. It had never touched this agreement. Laura finally looked at me. Mom, I can explain. Michelle closed the printed title and said, Then explain who created a seller who did not exist. Laura stared at the recovery number on the wall and finally said she had created the email account because I was slow with online forms. I was trying to make things easier, she said. Daniel Cho asked whether I had known about the account. No, I answered. No, A. He asked whether I had authorized her to use it for a real estate agreement. No, Laura turned toward me. You would have agreed once you saw the numbers. Michelle opened the full audit record. The agreement had been accessed from Laura's device at 2:14 on Wednesday afternoon. At that exact time, I had been signed into the volunteer computer at the Toronto Library several kilometers away. The record showed the confirmation code had been sent to Laura's telephone. Serena read each line twice before closing her eyes for a moment. Evan called it a technical mistake. The sale still makes financial sense, he said. Mom keeps the condominium. Everyone is protected. I placed a copy of my real signature beside the electronic one. Mine leaned forward and ended with a thin line beneath the final letter. The false signature was round and careless. I lifted Thomas's fountain pen. I signed every payment that built this house, I said. I did not sign this. Evan pushed his spreadsheet toward Daniel. We are not trying to steal anything. We are trying to organize a family asset. It is not a family asset, I said. It is my home. Laura said they expected to inherit it eventually and had only moved too quickly. You did not move quickly, I replied. You moved without me. Daniel instructed Serena to suspend the listing immediately and cancel the Saturday open house. He asked an assistant to contact the sign company and remove the lockbox. Serena confirmed that no offer would be accepted or presented as authorized by me. Laura began explaining that the photographs and staging work had already cost money. I looked at her. The cost of a plan does not make the plan mine, Evan said. Canceling the listing would damage more than their pride. His supplier deadline was approaching, and the showroom could fail. I turned toward both of my children. You did not list my house. You listed your plan. No one answered. The for sale page disappeared from Serena's screen while we sat there. Michelle then opened Evan's spreadsheet to the final section and rotated it toward him. One line had been highlighted in yellow. Family distribution before supplier deadline. Mr. Hale, she said, please explain why money from a house your mother never agreed to sell had already been assigned to your debt. Evan looked at the highlighted line and stopped pretending the spreadsheet was about my safety. He admitted that the custom kitchen showroom in Mississauga had missed 2 supplier payments. A lender had refused to extend the business credit unless he reduced the balance before the end of the month. He had entered money from my house into his repayment plan because he believed the sale was inevitable. Laura said she had fallen behind on her mortgage after losing several staging contracts. She expected her share to bring the account current. Neither of them had waited for an inheritance. They had already spent it in their minds. Daniel Cho recorded that the listing was suspended because the registered owner had not authorized it. The brokerage opened a compliance review and preserved the electronic records. Serena terminated the listing and canceled every showing. Before we left the conference room, she confirmed that the photographer, sign company, and open house staff had been notified. No buyer would be told that my home remained available. Evan said the canceled sale could destroy his business. Then your business was depending on money that never belonged to you, I replied. Laura said she had only created the email account because I trusted her. Trust is not permission to become me. By the time Michelle and I returned to the junction, the lockbox had been removed from the porch railing. The for sale sign came down that afternoon. Marco watched from across the street while the worker lifted it from my garden. The holes remained in the soil. I left them there for several days. They reminded me how quickly a plan could be planted when no one expected the owner to look closely. Michelle helped me secure my records. I changed the locks, email passwords, banking passwords, and emergency contacts. Laura returned her key and every copy of my tax and property documents. Evan received written notice that no discussion involving my home, finances, or future housing would take place without my invitation. I updated my estate plan through independent counsel. Neither child was given authority to manage my property during my lifetime. Evan negotiated separately with his lender and suppliers. Laura arranged her own mortgage repayment plan. Their problems did not disappear, but they were returned to the people who had created them. 2 weeks later, they came to apologize. I did not invite them inside. I told them trust would not be repaired by explaining the pressure they had felt. It would be repaired by respecting the word no before a lawyer had to repeat it. After they left, I carried the blue ledger to the Toronto Library, where I volunteered. I asked the branch coordinator whether I could reserve one table each month for older immigrant women who needed help organizing copies of their important records. She looked at the ledger beneath my arm and asked what I wanted to call the program. I opened it to the first mortgage payment Thomas and I had recorded 30 years earlier. Paper trail table, I said. 8 months later, I still lived in the red brick house in the Junction because staying had become my decision again. The front garden had recovered where the for sale sign once stood. I planted lavender over the 2 holes and kept Thomas's black fountain pen beside the blue ledger in my dining room. On the first Tuesday of every month, I carried both to the Toronto Library for paper trail table. Older immigrant women arrived with envelopes, property records, bank statements, wills, powers of attorney, password lists, and questions they had been too embarrassed to ask. I did not give legal advice. I helped them make copies, record dates, identify missing pages, and write down who held each original document. Michelle visited several times to explain general property and estate terms in plain language. Marco helped 2 women from our street arrange transportation when winter sidewalks became difficult. One afternoon, a Croatian widow named Ivana placed an empty folder in front of me. Her daughter kept the title, tax records, and banking information because she said those things were too complicated for an older woman. Ivana repeated the sentence I had once heard from my own children. She is only trying to make life easier. I opened the folder and handed her a pen. Then today, we make sure easier does not mean invisible. We wrote her full legal name across the front and listed every document she needed to copy. Her hand trembled on the first word and steadied before the last. Evan and Laura began visiting only when invited. They had no key and no access to my accounts. Evan negotiated a repayment plan for the showroom without using my house. Laura accepted more staging work and handled her mortgage without calling it my responsibility. Their apologies became less about pressure and more about what they had taken from me before any sale had occurred. I did not promise that trust would return quickly. I told them trust was built the same way a mortgage was paid, one honest payment at a time. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, I signed the library program register with his fountain pen. The ink flowed cleanly across the page. When I returned home that evening, the house was quiet, but it no longer felt like a place my children had nearly taken. It felt like proof that my future still required my voice. My children had tried to move me before I was ready to leave. I stayed long enough to teach other women that help should never require surrendering their name.